Greetings, family. I am excited again to have this dialogue, this discussion today as we celebrate this whole idea this upcoming weekend on fatherhood. And I have with me at least 4 fathers here with me as our panelists as we talk about this whole idea of fatherhood in 2020, dealing with so much that's going on and so many challenges, so many issues, and even that just being a father in this century that we currently live in can be challenging within itself. And so I have 4 brothers with me, and I'll start over to my left, your right, with this brother. He'll introduce himself and share with us just a few things, and then we'll rotate around, and then I'll come back to you again, and we'll start this dialogue.
I'm Clarence McQueen Jr. I have 3 sons, Clarence III, Terrence, and Cameron. And I've been a member at New Faith for 36 years.
Amen.
My name is Chris Newton. I've been a member here at New Faith for over 35 years. I have a blended family. I have 4 girls and 3 boys.
Okay.
My name is Herman Scott. I've been a member here at New Faith for 19 years now. I have 2 kids. My daughter Zaria is 24, and my son Xavier is 15 years old.
My name is Art Bryant. I've been a member here at New Faith for 32 years. I also have a blended family. My oldest is 49, my youngest is 24, and have 4 grandkids and 1 great-grandson.
Wow. Listen, we thank God for our panelists today who are here to have this conversation just about being fathers, this whole idea of fatherhood, especially in a culture where we have so many absent fathers. I think it's important that we sit down and just have dialogue, especially as we're leading into this whole idea of Father's Day coming on Sunday. And so as we do that, I just want to ask our panel, well, what do you enjoy most about being a father?
For me, it's having the 3 sons I had. My wife and I waited a little bit after we got married before we had them. So we had them a little bit later. I was just shy of 30. Mm-hmm. And the first one came. I said, I don't know if we did that intentionally or unintentionally, but I said, well, I'm going to be older, but they're going to be young. They're gonna be younger.
Yeah.
So I say if something happens down the line, I got somebody to look after me. But it's just having the 3 boys. The third one was supposed to be a girl, but that didn't work out. But I'm glad to have all 3 of my sons and the things that we have in common and the things that we get to do.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Well, I just like the trust that I see when a kid relates to their father. Mm-hmm. It's just overwhelming, you know. I mean, as long as they know that you have their best interest, and that comes from experience.
Yeah.
I mean, they will jump in the pool as long as you hold your hands out or whatever. So that was the thing I really enjoyed. And like I told, my oldest is 49, and I have 47, and so my youngest is 24.
Wow.
So I've been parenting for 50 years.
Wow.
And what worked for the first 2 doesn't quite work now.
Yeah.
And,
Amen.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah.
I think I appreciate and I love being a father from the standpoint of when the advice that I may have gotten from my grandparents, my parents, I can also pass down to my kids. And I see it come to fruition that they see the wisdom that kind of rolls downhill, and they use that wisdom, and it actually gets them further down the road than they may have been without that guidance.
Okay, that's good.
The things I enjoy most, especially when they were younger, when you would come home from work and it's been a hard day, stressed out, and they just come run and jump into your arms, Like you say, that trust that's built up over the years, and then the achievements and the milestones, the mile markers that you set throughout their life that you can look back over now and watch them become their own individual selves, and you had a lot to do with that and shaping that. So that's what I really enjoyed most, about being, of course I'm continuing, and you transition into, grandparenthood, and the advice is a little bit different, as they get older. But it's just been a joy just watching them grow and become their own individual people.
Absolutely. So in this current culture that we're in, black men being fathers in this current context that we're in, and I think, Art, you have probably the longest tenure as a father here. What are some of the challenges that you faced as a young African-American father in the culture that we currently live in, and even back then? What are some of the challenges you faced?
Well, I think it's more of what's expected from the black man. And we have culturally allowed some expectations just by what's exposed in the media. And we have to counteract that, like the black father is absent. And some of those things are relevant. But for me, I wanted to show that a black father, he could be a breadwinner, he could love his kids, he could do all of those things and bring them up in a way that was pleasing to God. So that was the challenge for me, because that's how I was raised.
Absolutely.
My parents, it was a little different as far as the discipline goes, but other than that, they wanted you to be respectful and grow into responsible, contributing adults.
Absolutely.
And that's what my goal was. And so the challenge was to overcome that stigma that was out there, that black men would not be present, they wouldn't be available, and then, even some say we're lazy.
Yeah.
So, we had to overcome that.
Yeah. Chris, you're a little younger. What's your thoughts on the whole challenge of parenting in this culture now?
From my perspective, the biggest challenge can be just because of what we were talking about the absentee fathers. You have a swath of brothers out there who did not get clear guidance in their youth. So they didn't know how to treat a woman correctly. They didn't know how to be reverent to the word, so that they could be right on the inside, so they can, get good fruit. We kind of, I can say for myself that there were some lessons that I learned as a, grown person that I wish I would have learned as a teenager, as a younger adult, didn't wait until I might actually grown. So the challenges is that getting good guidance, getting good food to eat for your mind, for your soul, for your spirit, to be able to, bring forth these young ones in the right way. So the challenges of getting that good information, getting in a good church. I was always blessed to be here, being able to see clearly what your path is as it goes according to God's will.
Okay.
So that was my challenge.
Wonderful. Clarence, what are your thoughts?
Well, the household I grew up in, mom and dad were there. It's the examples that were placed in front of me are ones that I stick close to this day. Mom and dad stayed together. Father passed 5 years ago. Mom is just ticking right along. There's a lot of things that she had to learn that she didn't necessarily get. She saw my dad do, but dad was you can't do this. So everything that I learned, dad was everything is hands-on. And I'm passing this along to all three of my sons, because all of them have special talents.
Absolutely.
That they can do different things in. And all of this wouldn't have been possible without how I grew up and what I was exposed to. There's so much that they have to be aware of nowadays that perhaps wasn't quite as much of a concern, not like I say concern for us to be aware of. These things existed, but we weren't always knowledgeable of them. Nowadays, everything we see, I look at, I'm like, okay, I remember that. But now it's just like right there in your face. It can't be ignored anymore.
Absolutely.
You say, well, I can make it work, and that's what we did. We made it work. They say, well, you can't do this, or you have this education, but you got to do twice as much here as the next person does in order to have what they have.
Right.
And that's not the way it should be, but again, that's where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in the current context, you know, that we're talking about, this whole idea of fathers, there obviously was some divide in the homes in terms of, you know, mothers raising children without a father figure being present, and quite a few fathers, you know, were distant from their families, and as a result of that, many women raised their children without a father being present, especially in the Black community. What were some of the things that kept you steadfast in terms of staying in the family, making sure you worked it out, making sure you were there for your family? What was it that kept you from slipping into what was in the culture, which was a lot of African-American men just ultimately leaving their families? Herman, what were some of the things that kept you?
Well, one thing, growing up in my family environment, my grandma and grandpa had 12 kids, you know, and a lot of those marriages didn't last, you know. And I always told myself, you know, when I do get married, I don't want my kids to go through that, you know. So, and then having strong mentorship, which I ended up, when, like I say, I've been here 19 years, through Dr. Williams and Dr. Lewis, great advice over the years, you know, on some things that I can do better and ways to improve our family environment. Because we do live in a world that says, take care of me, take care of yourself. And so, you know, when you serve one another and your children see that, you know, but that was one thing that just, I always wanted to make sure that my kids didn't experience the same thing that I went through, you know, growing up in that environment. So,
absolutely. Art, what gave you that staying power, that perseverance to stay, work things out, no matter what happened, no matter the challenge? What caused you to stay in the home?
Well, like I said, I do have a blended family, and there are challenges related to the kids and relationships.
Absolutely.
When they don't have the same parents, right?
Absolutely.
So you have to make sure that you set the right example of love. And so I had to really sit back and try to get a full understanding of what love really is. We throw that word out so much, but then when it comes to application, what does it really look like? And so once I got a better understanding through Christ what love was,
Right.
then I know that I wanted my life to emulate Christ's life.
That's right.
And so I had to just, you know, whatever it takes, love covers all.
Love covers all.
Love covers all. So that's what kept me.
And that's one, and it's unique that you use the term love, because that's one of the commandments that God gives us. He says, ultimately, love the Lord God with all your heart, but then he says, ultimately, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I think uniquely tied to that is this whole idea of that's ultimately what's wrong with the world, is that we love ourselves too much and don't love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And so I think for a father to ultimately be steadfast, he first has to love his children as he loves himself. And then I think ultimately loving God means that ought to relay back to how you treat your children, how you treat your family, how you treat your wife, and all those other entities that come involved with the whole family structure. Let me pose another question. As we're moving with this whole idea of fathers and moving with this idea of fathers having staying power, one of the things that I think is important is this whole idea of spirituality, having a connection between you and God, knowing who God is, as Art articulated. Let me ask you, Clarence, what is it in terms of spirituality? How do you portray spirituality as a father?
Well, I looked at the examples that I had growing up. My dad was not always in church, but Dad always tithed. He said that if he didn't go, his money went. My mom was a faithful churchgoer. Grandparents were a faithful churchgoer. So I had examples in front of me, and that was the path that I chose. Initially, as far as religion is concerned, when I started through elementary school, middle school, I was actually Catholic.
Okay.
And when I went to college, we were disciples of Christ. And that led me into where I am now. Led me to where I am now, because that's more of what I identified with. So I followed that path. I'm one of God's children, and I consider myself, even at the age of 61, as a work in progress.
Absolutely.
In terms of, this is what God said, this is what you need to do. My wife grew up in church Sunday morning, all day. Everybody, I mean, from, I ain't gonna say sun up to sundown, but every day, and she brought that to the family. So with regard to what we do as far as spirituality and our relationships with God, I would say we're 50-50, but she had more of the exposure. I was I would say a goer and not a doer. And with God working on me now, I'm trying to do more things. So, and I'm imparting that upon my kids. I even have a situation with a young man that I know, and he just turned 40 when he got married. I know my son and daughter-in-law went through marriage counseling with you almost 3 years ago. And that there was some issues there that you managed to dig into and open their eyes to. And had it not been for the guidance you provided, there's the young man that I know that just got married. He was 41 when he got married. I told him, I said, I'm seeing some of the things you and your wife are going through now. I said, you need to do this. He didn't do it. I texted him a few days ago, and he's like, man, it's the same stuff. Before we got married, I said, it's not too late. So I said, above all else, you need to get back in the church. And he texted me back and said, you right, there is no reason for me. I was raised in the church. There's no reason for me to not be there.
Absolutely.
So I know all of this does have an effect and makes us who we are. And God is present in our lives at all times. Like you say, we may not always get everything we want when we want, but it's all going to be taken care of because it's in God's plans. And I tell my sons, I have a middle one. I'm like, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. And so I know ultimately they're going to make it right.
Absolutely. Chris, in a blended family structure, talk to me about modeling your spirituality in the home as a father.
Well, I believe I would say that the best way in a blended family that you have to look at things is you got to look at things absolutely the way Jesus walked along, and he didn't just go to the saved, the sanctified. He looked at the sinner, the one that was back crawling, and not that you look at your kids and say they're doing all that bad stuff, but you have to look at it and say, hey, everybody's different. They're going to react differently to different stimulus. So when let's say you have to, I would say, attitude adjustment to each kid, you have to recognize, well, what does this kid bring to the table? What motivates them? How do you tap into what motivates them? It's not terribly unlike an athlete with their coach. Being the coach knows one athlete you might have to yell at. The other athlete you may just have to sit down and have a conversation with. The next athlete, you might have to actually give them some type of punishment, like, hey, you need to do this, So with kids, my structure, the way I look at it is I'll first know in a blended family, the onus is on me. I have to be more for them than they're ever going to be toward me. So I have to come in, ready to work. I can't assume that they know my way, because, in a blended family, I mean, they came into this world and you wasn't there.
Right.
So they're learning you just as much as you're learning them.
Absolutely.
And with them being children, they still think as children. As a man, you now should be more mature and more able to grasp that this is going to be a little more difficult than it is for them. It's going to be more difficult for me because I can't push my agenda without, just like Art said, without the love. They have to understand that I love them. It's unconditional. It's, I'm going to tell you when you're right. I'm going to tell you when you're wrong. But through all, that love, kind of like that love that you spoke of last Sunday, about knowing that even when you make me angry and you do things that I don't want you to do, I love you. That's not going anywhere.
That's right.
You know, and so once they get that, or they really let that soak in, then you can start doing some other stuff. You can start working on them and kind of guiding their life toward a Christian path. And that's, at least that's the route that I try to go.
Wonderful. One of the things too, I think, from a spiritual perspective that Jesus always demonstrated and displayed was that in love, or him loving us, you'll never have broken relationship, but you may have broken fellowship. And I think one of the things that we as fathers have to mimic, as Jesus being the ultimate father, is understanding that your children may frustrate you. And Lord knows they will frustrate you. Your children will frustrate you. They'll agitate you, especially when you have spent, tedious amount of time sharing the same thing over and over again, but yet still they want to bump their heads even after you've given them your life experience, is not distancing ourselves from having a relationship with them because they disobeyed us. Right. A part of loving our kids as a father is acknowledging the fact that even in a broken fellowship, I can still have relationship with you, which simply means I'm mad with you, but I love you. Right. And Scripture tells us over and over again that we can be angry but don't sin. And so I think a part of, as Art talked about, and also as Chris talked about, this whole idea of loving, I think this love mantra has to stay within not just men, fathers, but even in the African-American community, where there's such a divide between fathers and their children. Let's take the covers off, if you will. Let's take the covers off and expose some other areas. In the culture that we're in, especially in the church culture, when we talk spirituality, I know one of the things that used to agitate my grandfather is around this season, around Father's Day, my grandmother would urge and push him to come to church for Father's Day. And when he would come to church on Father's Day, he would be agitated because almost all the time the minister was going to preach a message denigrating the father, in some way saying something negative about fathers in general. And my grandfather would get agitated because he felt like that's not my story. My story is so much more different than what I'm hearing. And then even in fact, he also felt like for those men that were coming to church, they needed to hear something uplifting. They needed to hear something that was pushing them to be steadfast like you brothers have been in your families. So let me ask this question. What are some of the things that agitate you about being a father in the whole church culture? Do you feel like, or let me rephrase it, do you feel like the church has dealt with the black dad well?
Well, in general, just church culture, on Mother's Day, you can't get a seat in a restaurant. On Father's Day, you can sit anywhere you want to, pretty much. We celebrate the mothers, and rightfully so. But, as fathers, and I've heard it say, and, it begins to seep out, they don't celebrate dads, as you mentioned. If you hear a message, it's not positive or uplifting, or keep going, encouraging you to remain steadfast, the burden bearer in many cases, So I just, culture overall, they're not celebrated enough, Like you may get a tie, you get that old tie that you don't wear. Not saying that I do, because I don't want to push my gifts up. Man, not saying. But over time, as you see how dads, especially black dads, are celebrated or encouraged along their journey, then it's expected.
Expected.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Art, your thoughts on that?
Well, like you said, expectation, again, is one thing. I grew up in a family. My dad was a deacon in the church. 9 kids. very strong disciplinarian.
Okay.
So
So you knew what the belt felt like.
I knew what the belt felt like, and sometimes I was even aggravated because I felt like it wasn't the trust there that I needed to express myself, that
Absolutely.
I got some good intentions. You don't have to force, your thoughts on me. So backing up to now, I guess I groom myself with lowering my expectations for what any outside person could put on me. I wanted to, so I didn't have high expectations for you to put me on this ladder as a dad, right? And I think that is, again, your preference to higher expectations allow you to be disappointed. So I felt like, okay, I just do what I do based on how I was brought up. And, I've never seen the righteous forsaken or seed begging bread. So I knew that my dad's, work was going to manifest itself. I took a detour, and not saying that, I was straight, on the word all the time. So many of us take a detour. But at the end of the day, I wanted to just have the expectations of living out that which I was taught.
Absolutely.
And no one else can put their
Expectation.
expectation on me.
Wonderful, wonderful. Chris, that same vein, but I want to draw it out a little bit. This idea of the church and the black father, do you feel that the church as a whole has given black fathers the spiritual tools necessary and the support necessary to be good fathers?
That's pretty difficult. That's deep. I'm very tempted to say yes, and I think that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to say yes, they have. I don't feel like as a father, at least my home, New Faith, has put more on me than I could bear. I think that they have given me guidance that has and put opportunity out there to become a stronger father. A lot is in the way of becoming a stronger Christian, which will make you become a stronger father, because the more knowledge you gain in Christ, the better you will be apt to deal with anything that the world hands to you. So I would say that as a young man, before I was a father, I would have liked to have had some type of education, because my dad, who's passed now, and we funeralized him here, and I would say that he was more in the vein of, he didn't push to go to church. He believed in God and he worshiped, but he wasn't where I want to be now. Now that my eyes are open as a man, he wasn't there. And I wish he would have been, but, I can't. That was him. So I didn't get the guidance, and what terrifies me as a parent is the street teaching my kids. That terrifies me. So I wish, in which, like, all right, I had a detour. Some of the stuff that I learned came from outside this building and outside of my dad's purview. So, in that realm, I had a blind spot for certain things that I didn't learn until I became, a very grown man. And there's still things that I'm learning now. There's no way that I got it all together. But I would say that, I don't know. I think it might be a wise thing for us to maybe drill down into some of these young men coming up. That, hey, let me, not that we're trying to advocate young men going out there and having these kids and this, that, and other if you're not ready. But let's be real about it and say, hey, things happen. Let's show you how to, in Christ, in the church, go forward, being a man of God, being a father, a parent that could, be the one who guides another person into the light, so to speak.
Okay, sounds good. So what I hear you saying then is that the church's model has to incorporate mentorship.
Correct.
Is what I'm hearing. And so if that's the case, then let me ask another question. As a father, do you think it becomes your universal responsibility to not only mentor your sons, your daughters, but also to mentor a generation of fatherless children?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way they should go, which ultimately means be your first child's be your child's first teacher.
Right.
So, and learning that, a lot of that becomes, what do you do? Because when I grew up, it was, I said it, do it.
Yeah.
But what you're saying, what
Yeah.
you're doing don't match up. So it can
Yeah.
be real confusing.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
So in spiritual growth, as you mentioned earlier, I'm learning that your words and your actions have to mimic identically to one another. And if it don't, then you're leaving your child, it's 50-50. It could go, I'm not saying, it could go either way. You could do everything right by the book, but you pray every day that ultimately, when they're old, they will not, straight, but return. Right.
Absolutely.
And that's how I feel that we should ultimately try to live what we preach or practice what we preach every day.
Absolutely. Clarence, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that wholeheartedly. Everything that we do nowadays has to be, everything they say is lead by example.
Yeah.
I'm an educator. The school I teach at, we have an underprivileged population. So I see a lot of, when I'm having to contact parents about things that are good or things not so good, probably 7 times out of 10, I'm talking to the mom, not the dad.
Yeah.
So with that being said, the relationships that I try and forge with my students and anybody in there that I see has need, I try to example that. I reach out. I try and establish a relationship with them, which enables me to pass along some information and say, hey, if you need something, I am here to help. Because you're not in this by yourself, by any shape of the imagination. It is our job to reach out and try and touch as many of our young men, like you say, fatherless home, our young men as possible, to see if we can get them where they need to be, or at least get them on that path.
Absolutely. And let me pull the covers off again. Now we're down to the waistline. And so in many homes that have fathers, I think one of the conversations that's in the culture, especially in our culture, is that you can be an absentee father in the house. And I think that's one of the things that, as a youth minister, I used to see. I was a youth minister for 15 years, and before I became senior pastor. And one of the things that I saw more regularly than anything is that there were fathers in the home, but they were still absent. And in more cases than none, you would find fathers who were good at being the disciplinarian, but they weren't good at being the model. And so I think one of the things that needs to be addressed is how, as a mother, what would you say to a mother in the home who's having to do or carry the weight of fatherhood for an absentee father? Brother Art?
Well, I would suggest that she gets herself, hopefully she's in the church, and she gets yoked with someone, a dad or just a male figure who has knowledge of fatherhood. He's been raised properly, and try to get that association to give advice to her, her children, her son or whatever. A woman is difficult to teach a woman. I mean, a woman to teach a young man how to be a young man. That is very difficult. And so you need other men to show, especially a young man, how to be a man. So you need modeling. And if you look at the church today, you see typically more women in the church than you see men.
Absolutely.
So that's a generational effect that we're dealing with now. So the women have assumed the responsibility in some areas. And so it's a challenge that I think that most women think that they're adequate, which is not a knock on them, but until you've walked that walk
That's it.
of what it takes to be a man and to raise a strong man out of a young man, then I think that it's wise that you seek input from someone who's been there.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. Herman, what are your thoughts on that?
And this is speaking to the wife.
Yeah.
That, yeah, I would have to agree wholeheartedly. Even in the absentee father homes, you would see in churches past that the deacons, elders would. It takes a village to raise a child, and whether the father's there, all the time or not, it still takes a village. Because back when I was growing up, if I did something at Kroger, it beat me back home before I got there.
That's right.
Or at school, the school teacher, would call.
Yeah.
Hey, he was cutting up. So not only did you get it at school,
right.
you got it when you got home, and then if your grandma and grandpa was next door, you might have got it 3 times. But that being said, I would encourage them to do that extensively, to yoke them in ministries and programs where they can be around positive male role models and role figures. I mean, still keep grinding, and encourage your husband that because one thing I've taught my kids and I've learned, you can get back money, you can get back things, you can't get back time.
That's right.
And once that time is gone, there's no return on that. So in my own example, working long days, my dad worked in the oil business, so he was gone. So made good money back in the 80s. And I worked, UPS, made good money. But I made a decision some years ago that time was going by and my kids are starting to grow up and I'm missing a lot of activities. If they had a program here at the church, I wouldn't be able to get here at 7 on a Wednesday night. It had to be on a Saturday or a Sunday. So I had to make a decision that I'll change shifts, I'll lose, some dollars, okay, but I'll have that time, that valuable time to be there with them. So I would encourage her, to speak to her husband, and let her know how important it is. If you're working, fine, but we got to find a way to have you there because that is the most valuable thing that we can give our children.
Wonderful. So I'm going to do something as we, come to this closing portion of our segment. I'm going to do something called rapid fire. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rapidly give you a question and you answer that question to the best of your ability in maybe 2 to 3 short sentences so that we can kind of do this conversation that we're having some justice. I know for the single mom during this season, there's a lot of tension and a lot of frustration. And one of the things I experienced growing up in a single family home, and I being the oldest of my siblings, one of the things that my mom did that I respected so much as I got older was she never talked about my dad. She made it her business not to say anything negative about my father. And as a result of that, she allowed me an opportunity to develop my own experiences with him. And then on top of that, I came up with my own conclusions. And one of the things that I see regularly, which is why I think the celebrations of fathers are so minimal, not only in society, but also in the church. It is a frustrating moment for African Americans to celebrate dads. And I think some of that comes from the frustration of women having to carry the blunt of being both mother and father, both provider and protector. What do you say to the angry mom who has an absentee father and she's raising a child or children, and this dad is nowhere in the picture, but the child, because this happens all the time, still wants a relationship? Clarence?
I'm going to reach out. If I were that mother, I would reach out to that father And even if it tears me up inside because of whatever the circumstances were that they separated, to say, we've got to schedule some or try and arrange some sort of time with you, with your son or sons or whatever the situation may be, so that they can find out what it is to be around you, what you're like, instead of coming up with something that somebody else says or something else that they see. That's what I would do, is just go directly to the wife, go directly to the husband, ex-husband, whatever the case may be, and said, hey, you got to spend some time with your boys, because they can get whatever they get from wherever else in the world, social media, TV, the whole nine. And the spin on it 9 times out of 10 is not as positive as we would like for it to be, or as we know it to be.
Okay, wonderful. Chris, same question.
First, I would say, I'm sorry, moms. I apologize that this man failed you in some way, not for the relationship between you two, but the relationship between that father and that child. I agree that, if there is some type of thing that can be forged between the mom and the dad, you figure it out, try to figure it out as best you can. If that's just not going to happen, I'd say you have to look internal to your brother, your dad, your grandparent, your uncle, and find a male figure that you respect, that you trust, and see if you can find out, hey, can I, I don't, maybe it's not necessarily financial, but can you take them out and play ball?
Okay.
Can you, show them the ways of the Lord, and just whatever, because it's very difficult. I agree wholeheartedly. It's very difficult for a woman to instill manly characteristics into a male. It's just very difficult.
Absolutely. Art, what advice do you give to a new father?
To a new father is to selflessness. I think you have to just be willing to give of yourself, because having children that didn't ask to be here, that requires so much parenting, you have to encourage them, you have to do all these things. And so you have to be willing as a father to just give of yourself. That's all I can say, is just to be willing to fully give in all areas of your life.
Amen. Well, listen, brothers, this has been a tremendous time just kind of sharing this whole idea of fatherhood. And I want to thank each and every one of you for availing yourself of this time that we've shared, just kind of sharing from your own personal experiences, sharing from your own fatherhood, sharing from what you experienced from your father, and even the mentorship that you've received. And I think this has been beneficial not only to our church, but anybody who would stream in these next few days what we've been able to talk about and deal with today. In parting, I would want to say to all fathers, whether you are in the home or out of the home, statistically, it has been proven that fathers who have time, who spend time with their children, are more successful. Let this Father's Day gift not just be a tie, not just be cologne, not just be socks, but let this Father's Day, the greatest gift that you can give to yourself is spending time with your children. And I want to encourage you, brothers, to spend that time with your family, get opportunities to get to know them, and spend time sharing some of those life experiences. As one of our panelists has already said, keeping it real with your kids and helping them to appreciate Dad made some mistakes, but with the help of God, I was able to overcome them. And to the father who is not in the home, I want to say to you, even though you don't have a relationship with the mother, you owe it to your children to have a relationship with them. I want to thank each and every one of you who streamed with us today. Again, I want to thank our panelists. And this has been Conversations Around Fatherhood. And may the people of God say amen. Have a blessed week.
I would just like to say Happy Father's Day to all the fathers, and especially all the fathers of New Faith, because this is a special day. Enjoy your day.
I would like to wish all the fathers happy Father's Day today. I hope that you are celebrated and hugged and loved on and appreciated for the dad that you are. And I encourage you to keep God first and to always remember to spend as much time as you can with your kids and your loved ones.
All right. I would like to say happy Father's Day to all the fathers of New Faith Church. I'd like to say thank you for being there. Some of the older members you played a role in my life as being good fathers, even though you weren't my father, but you were there. You gave me a role model to look up to. So once again, thank you, and happy Father's Day, and happy Grandfather's Day. Thank you.
Happy Father's Day to all of our fathers, the grandfathers, expectant fathers. I appreciate being a father, and I hope you do also. So let's have fun this day. Let's celebrate with our families, and let's continue to take care of ourselves and our families going forward so that we have many more Father's Day to celebrate. Thanks again, and have a great day. May God bless you all.